Welcome everyone back to another video on SecureX. Hope everyone is staying well and safe, right? Today we'll look at the configuration for Cisco SecureX and Cisco Secure Endpoint, right? Previously known as M for Endpoint. So let's start by logging into the SecureX application portal, right? So after you enter in your username and password and verify with a dual MFA, you'll be brought to this screen, right, whereby you can choose your instance of the SecureX that you're going to launch, right? So for me, my instance is in APJC. I will basically click on this and launch the SecureX portal right here. So do take note that the location of the instance is very important when you do all the integration, but I'm not going to cover it here today. But more importantly, let's look at how do I quickly integrate M for endpoint into SecureX. I've already done the integration, but I'll show you where you can get this done, right? So on the right panel, you can see all the applications that you can launch and integrate. So if you want to integrate M for endpoint, right? All you have to do is come over to the left side, right? There is a panel for you to add a new M for endpoint. So when you click add, what it does is you bring you to this page whereby you can basically specify the name of the module, right, that you're going to integrate. So M for endpoint demo, for example. Now, the URL is critical. Remember, I was just sharing with you. By default, it will give you the US instance. So if you are in APJC or Europe, do remember to select the respective, uh, you know, um, instance that you're going to log into, right? So once that is done, you will basically be required to key in the third-party API client ID, which is effectively similar to a username, and then API key, which is similar to a password, right? Uh, so that is where you will need to enter in the information in SecureX. Now let's switch over to M for Endpoint, right? I have a Secure Endpoint Premier Edition, right? So once I log in, I'll be brought to the dashboard. Where you want to go is um, the account page, right? Click on API credential, right? And then click on add new API key, right? You want to allow read write, give it a name called video demo, right? And then click on create. Okay, it will give you a new API key and a new API client ID and a new API key, right? I'm going to delete this API key after this recording, so I'm not too worried about exposing the API key, but this is critical. Treat it as you would treat a password, because with the client ID and the API key, right? If this is exposed, anyone can basically use a API call, right, to your secure endpoint instance. So really, really important, right? Do not expose this password to anybody. Okay. Once this is done, what I can do is go back to my SecureX instance, right? Oops, where's my SecureX instance? Okay, my secure instance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on copy and enter in the client ID. Let's close this. And then I'm going to copy the API key, and then I'm going to add it in, right? So the minute I click save, right, a dashboard is created for my M for endpoint demo, right? You'll say that the this integration module has no issue, you know that it's been successfully done. So now let's hop back to the dashboard, right? You can import the M4 endpoint demo data, right? So you can see I've actually created a new dashboard called M4 endpoint demo copy. Okay, ignore the error for now. It's never recommended to have multiple API keys for the same thing, right? So we can just take a look at it. Data API errors, unsupported period last 60 days, etc. Okay, so let's remove this tile, and then we can go back here. You can see that the data are being imported from M4 endpoint into SecureX. Okay, so that's very much what we need to do for the M4 endpoint. Then next, let's switch over to how do I um, use the orchestration workflow to leverage on the isolation workflow with two-tier approval. So let's click on orchestration. Okay, if you have block up pop-up blocker like me, right? You can always turn it off or just allow that pop-up for one time, right? So when you get into the orchestration tab, right, up front you will see the various workflow that should have been imported into your orchestration environment. Now, if you have not, or if that's the first time accessing the orchestration page, click on import, right, and then select the workflow, right. There are a couple of sample workflows that are already created, right. You can come here and you can see that there are 6 workflows that are created um, in on GitHub itself. Of course, so you can then select M for M host isolation with approval, select the versions, and then import, right? I'm not going to import this as I have already have mine right here. Sorry, right here, right? So what I'm going to do is to go into the M host isolation with tier 2 approval, right? By default, right? If you have tried to run this workflow recently, you realize that it might not work out of the box, and there's a reason for it. There's a couple of configuration in this workflow itself that you need to basically ensure that the variables are filled in, right, for it to work properly. But we're going to go through the standard workflow without much changes, right? So we can go into the workflow. You will see that the first thing that the workflow does is basically to check whether the observable, which you will see a lot in the SecureX terminology, is the value, right, of the data that you're going to pass in. So if for this workflow, we are actually looking for AMP computer GUID, right? The unique ID, right? So it will basically first check whether you have a valid GUID. If yes, right? If no, then it'll give you a failure and the workflow will not continue, right? If you get a valid GUID, what happens is that for this workflow, it uses the Cisco threat response access token to do the isolation, right? So you'll first create a token, right? It's a standard HTTP request, and then it will look at the types, which is the MG G computer GUID, and the value, right, um, of that computer ID or GUID, right? And then continue with the workflow, right? So once you have that information, what it will does is that it will basically then create approval request, right? So this is where your second level or two-tier approval kicks in, right? So you can configure the requester right over here and the approval over here, right? This is important because I'll show you that out of the box, these are not populated automatically. And there's a reason for it, right? I will go through that in a bit. So once that is done, right, you will see that you give you a message, right, in your approval workflow to look at what is the host that you are going to isolate in this case, right? And then of course you'll be presented with a choice to approve or reject. And you can configure the duration of this request and then expiration date, etc. Right? Out of the box, you also get a option, right, to send email, right? After the approval is being routed to the approval, uh, the approval person or the person approving that request, you can also at the same time in parallel send an email to notify somebody, right? So we'll talk a little bit more on the day two operation in another video, but more importantly from a demo perspective, uh, I'm going to show you what you need to configure, right? You need to configure the email address as shown here. Now, the good thing for the workflow is that if you do not key in a valid email, there will be a warning to say that you have not entered in the to recipient, right? So there are a few places that you need to make sure that you have um, the information key in, right? One is the to. So the good thing is that if it's a warning, it is not a major issue, right? You can always take away that email object here, right? You can actually just delete it if you are not going to use it, right? But for this demo, I'm going also going to show you the workflow of the email being sent, right? So I'm going to put in the email, the to recipient, and then what I'm going to do is a subject header whereby you can see demo isolation of host request demo. In the subject or the message, you can actually customize it to look at to take in the parameter of this workflow, right? So I've basically put in there the requester, uh, the isolation of the variable type, right, or the identifier, which is the computer computer GUID, and the instance, the computer name, and then followed by who is the approver, right? So these are the key few. These are the key areas: the subject, the message, and the tool that you need to populate for this you know um, action to happen, right? So let's validate this. It should not give you any warning or error, right? And then once it's done, we will the workflow will wait for the approval, right? You know um, and see what is the condition, right? Whether it is approve or reject. Once that is done, right, it will trigger, right, the action based on the approval. So if it's approved, then what it will do is it will start to basically initiate the isolation of this endpoint, right, based on the computer ID, GUID, as well as the computer, the instance, the actual instance itself, right? So this is how out of the box the basic instance looks like. It will work when you run this, right? And how do we test this? Let's go to run, key in amp computer underscore GUID, right? And we will go over to the uh, dashboard. Okay, I already have simulated some possible incidents. Let's go into investigate in threat response. That's where you use M in conjunction with threat response for hunting and etc. Okay, and then over here is the AMP GUID that we need. So I'm going to copy this just for our demo run. Hop back to the orchestration piece, put in the observable, and we will click run. Right. The great thing about the whole run, you can see that the run is being run in the execution is happening in real time. The green boxes and the green indications are what has actually successfully executed, right? So we go through, is this observable a env computer GUID? If it's yes, right, it hops over to create a token, get the list item, request for the approval, and at the same time an email has been sent, right? So an email, as you can see here, has been sent to my email address that says that the initiate a request for isolation of computer GUID with the GUID instance, right? You'll see that it's missing the requester and the approval. And that's the reason why I did this video, because, I was trying to find a video that can show me how to do this, but I couldn't, right? So end up, I went through the documentation and figure out what needs to be done, right? So this email is in parallel, right? That after the request for approval has been sent, an email is sent as well to the recipient, which is in my case, the DPSC admin, right? To basically get a notification of the request for isolation. Now let's move over, right? Where do you approve, right? It is done here in the task, right? I'm not going to talk about day 2 advisory, but I'm going to show you, right, where you go to basically approve a request. So when you click on this, which is generated, right, you will see that an AMP with the computer GUID, right, needs to be isolated. Please approve or reject, right? So out of the box, it allows you to run. And for those who have been doing demo without any additional configuration, it's fine, right? It will run, right? But the problem is, where can I do the approval and rejects, right? Approve and reject, right? You don't see it here, and there is a major reason. And when you look at the documentation, it does tell you that you need to have the assignee, right, the requester and approval configured, right? And this is important. Without this, they do not know who to send this to, and therefore you will not be able to approve or reject, right? A little bit needs to be done in terms of the interactive user help uh, on the orchestration piece, to be very frank. But having said that, if you are familiar with JSON, if you're familiar with how Cisco solution work, then it should be quite straightforward. Okay, let's click on done, right? So where do we configure, right, the requester and the approver or the task assignee? Okay, you need to come over to variables. Okay, by default, these are all populated. Now, what you need to add here right now is to put in a requester value, right? So in this case, it is going to be me sending to myself, which is not the usual use case unless you're a very small company and the requesters and the approvals are the same guy, right? And you just want this for audit purposes, right? I'm going to modify this and then click on approval. Same thing. Click on submit and modify the value. Okay. So with this, right, now our workflow should work, right? So very importantly, you need to key in the task approval and the task requester, right, with the proper value in there. So let's go over to my run again. Sorry, with workflow again. Let's go inside, right? So we can do all the verification and test here. So you can run as many times as possible, right? So uh, I'm going to initiate another run for the computer type, and this, let's run this again. You can see it's observable is correct. Everything is the tokens are generated, emails is sent. I'm back to waiting for approval. Now let's go over to tasks. Hopefully it works. And voila, right? Now you can see I have my requester, my owner, my assignee, right? And then I can now approve or reject, right? If I approve, the isolation will kick in and the machine will be isolated. I'm not going to isolate this in this demo. I'm going to do reject and says that isolation rejected, demo not going to kill my machine. Done, right? And when you go back to the workflow, the run, right? And the best part is you can search for the run that you are running. You can see that I'm still waiting for event um, for the demo that didn't have the approve and reject button, right? Because I'm not keying the owner and the assignee, right? And this is the one that has completed, right? So now let's go in to this, and you can actually see the task being executed and the actions and the value that are basically done, right? So you can see that it completes with uh, an approval that rejects the isolation, right? You can see over here, right? Successful. Okay, so that's pretty much what you need to do to configure the um, integration of SecureX and M4 endpoint, as well as how do you make the out of the box workflow work properly, right? As what is been advertised, right, it's really simple because I do not need to write the whole JSON code over here. It's really adding in the variables and the syntax as required, right? Like any other configuration. So Cisco has really made it very easy for SecureX to work, especially with the Cisco solution that you have invested in, right? And M4 Endpoint is a great start. I'm going to be doing a lot more video for, M4 Endpoint, whether it is the integration with SecureX or leveraging on the API calls. A lot of fun stuff we can do with M4 Endpoint, right? So stay tuned for more video. The last part that I did not show you is actually the new email that was sent. So in this email, you can see that I have now the requester, the computer ID, as well as the approval, right? So an email that gives you an audit trail. So if you are integrating into any um, managed engine or service desk kind of integration, you can actually customize your email so that you can activate a workflow over there as well. Those are more in-depth stuff day two operation kind of requirements will not touch in this video itself. But hope you enjoy the video, and for those of you who are like me who was trying to figure out why the default workflow didn't work, right? Hopefully this tutorial helps you in configuring your environment for demo purposes. Okay, thank you, stay safe, and have a great weekend.